Welcome back, everyone. It's been a while. It's been a couple of months, actually. Been busy. I've finished Woodwalkers 2 and a short film, and I'm working on 2 other short films and 3 video games. And I became a US citizen in the middle of it, so it's been busy. But I'm back now to being a menace to society. So today I want to talk about pitching, common misconceptions, the process, but also I really want to talk about how we actually get gigs. Because I want to start with a caveat, which is it's a recommendation-based industry. So most composers will not get their gigs through random pitching. No matter what composer you're talking to and you ask them, how did you get that gig? Usually there's a story there that has nothing to do with pitching. Looking at my own work, looking at my credits, some of it I got through assisting other composers. Some were co-writes with other composers. Some of them were recommendations, like someone didn't want to do the gig, and so they recommended me, or someone didn't have time, so they recommended me, or it could also have been not a composer, but another team member that I've worked with before on some other movie, and now they're on their next movie, and they're looking for a composer, and then the editor might go, hey, we had a really great composer on the previous thing I did. May I forward, her contact information? So it doesn't even have to be like a composer recommendation. It can also just be anybody else on the team. I've also gotten work through YouTube, through this channel. That wasn't the intention of the channel, but it has resulted in a lot of work in the video game space. Some of it I got through social media. Some of it I got because someone heard my work somewhere, right? Because that's going to happen more and more often. The more you put out there, the more you work on stuff, the more likely it is that someone's going to hear your work and go, oh, I'd like to work with this person. Some of it were also student collaborations. So, I scored their master thesis or, some student film, and then they graduated and eventually went on to make feature films and stuff. And so then I was their composer based on, the little thing that we had done before. I've also gotten 1 or 2 things where I've helped with funding, where the filmmakers had to pitch to get funding for their project. And so I helped them with like a trailer, a teaser, or, something with the presentation so they could get money. And then in exchange, I would get the gig. And then, yes, a few are from preparing reels or from pitching, but that is the minority of my credits. So I'd urge you to talk to as many composers as you can and actually ask them, how did you get that? And I will assure you, every story is unique. Every story is going to be somewhat random, but they will all have the same core, which is either they were recommended by a trusted person, or they built up a relationship with the filmmakers, game developers, whatever. The common thread is always going to be relationships and trust. Because even if they reach out to you and they've never worked with you and you didn't come recommended, there's no connection, they must have heard your work or seen your YouTube channel or whatever and gained trust in that you can do the job. And then a lot of the gigs that I have, and that also, again, if you talk to other composers, it'll be a similar story. We tend to work with the same people over and over again. So if I look at my clients, really most of my credits come from like the same 5 clients that I've been working with. Because if you do a good job and you're, having a good connection with the people that you're working with, then they're going to come back. And so if you have enough of those returning clients, of course, you're going to have work forever. I really think educational programs focus a bit too much sometimes on pitching and preparing reels and all that stuff, when really that's not necessarily how you get the work. Like, they will make their students believe that that's how you get gigs, but the majority of gigs will actually come from a whole lot of other things. In fact, most of the stuff that I've gotten, I never even pitched for. I never even prepared a reel. So make of that what you will. Now let's talk about the usual process if you do pitch. Normally what happens if a production is up for grabs is that the music executives are going to reach out to the different agencies, composer agencies, and will, give them the brief and basically be like, give us some composers, reels, have your people prepare something. We're trying to find a composer that fits this particular thing. However, before we go into, but then you need an agent or manager, you don't. I parted ways with my manager 1.5 years ago, roughly, and I'm still pitching, and I can still get in contact with these executives, and they will still give me pitches and reels to prepare and stuff. So your access does not all of a sudden go away. They're still taking my calls and they're still taking meetings with me. It's just that I have to do the legwork, basically. That's the difference. But I actually kind of like it this way because this way I get way more face time with the executives, which is much better to build a relationship rather than having, the agents and managers take all the meetings, because then the executives mostly just know the agents and not necessarily the clients all that well. So I actually kind of like that this, that the middleman is removed and I can just directly reach out to people and they're just directly talking to me. And access through agents and managers is no guarantee that you're going to get a gig. Look at the agencies, just go to their websites, look at their rosters, and actually see who is busy on their roster. I assure you, half of their rosters are usually out of work. So clearly having an agent or manager is not a guarantee. The access to the pitches is not a guarantee that you're going to have work. They're not a magic pill, unfortunately. But so, further in the process, usually if the call goes out to everybody, it's what we often call a cattle call pitch, where basically anyone can participate. Or sometimes they already have curated a list of 5 to 10 people, or sometimes 15, that they specifically want to participate. So they've already made a short list. So it's, a much smaller group. Usually they do that if they already have specific people in mind, or also, just to lighten their workload, because obviously if they open it up to everybody, then the executives are just going to have a shit ton of work, right? Just trying to pick someone out of 200 people or whatever. Then once you've agreed to participate, they send you an NDA that you sign, which is why I can't show any of the materials, unfortunately, because for every single one of them I have signed an NDA, so I can't really, show you what it looks like to get a pitch, but I can describe it. So normally what you get is what they call the Bible for a project, which is usually just a very large PDF file that contains, the characters, the story, especially if it's for something episodic. It'll summarize what the characters' journeys are and just anything you need to know about the project. Or sometimes if they're not that far along in the process, then you just get 1 or 2 pages with sound references and the general synopsis of the thing. And usually they also already tell you what the pay will be and other things in the project. Are they going to pay for union recording and all this kind of stuff? Are they going to pay for SAG fees? Stuff like that. They've already written that down for you, so you can make an informed decision whether you want to participate or not. Because, sometimes the pay might be too low and you don't want to participate, or sometimes once you have the material, you actually see, I'm not actually a good fit. So this way you can decide a lot better if this is for you or not. Or in other cases, you might also get the script if they have one, so then you're going to be required to read the script, which can be a bit involved, honestly. If it's a really long script, if it's 90 pages, then it can be a bit labor intensive. And so then based on that information, you prepare a reel with existing music that you have. I mean, you can also write something specific Sometimes I do if I don't have the exact thing they're looking for, but I know I can do it very quickly, then I might just write a short piece that fits the briefing a little bit better. But generally speaking, you would use music that you've already written, prepare a reel. You can use something like Reel Crafter, which a lot of composers do. I personally use my own website, like I just create an extra page and I have my own template there that I can modify. Doesn't really matter how you do it. Sometimes they want downloadable stuff as well, so then it's good to have a Dropbox or something, or WeTransfer, or whatever platform you like to use. Or they give you an upload link to which to upload your tracks. So it's going to be slightly different depending on what they prefer, because some of them want just streaming links and some of them are very adamant that you send them files they can actually download to their computer. Now, what you would do is you would pick tracks, obviously, that are relevant to the briefing, and you want to pick tracks that get to the point quickly. You don't want to pick tracks that start with like a 20-second drone or something. If you want to use that track, you can, but then I would suggest that you edit the track. Just make an audio edit so that, they actually hear the part of the track that is relevant, most relevant to the briefing, because they're not going to listen to everything, of course. And you also want to put them in a useful order. There's no point in having 3 times a similar track after one another, right? You want to create like a pleasant listening order that is that shows variation and that shows different styles so that they can see the range that you have as an artist. And then something I like to do, and what most composers that I've talked to do, is they will throw in a couple bonus tracks and they will like label them as such or just throw them in towards the end, which is other tracks that could fit the briefing but that deviate a bit, or just something really crazy that you just want to show, something creative you've done where you're like, I want them to also hear this. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. You can also include making off videos or music videos. I do that sometimes. Some executives don't watch it. Some executives prefer to watch that over listening to the reels, because then they hear me explain the music and the thoughts behind it, and they kind of get a better idea of who I am as a person. But yeah, it's personal preference on their end. I just provide them with both, and then they can pick whatever they want to listen to. In some cases, they will also ask for a resume, as in like a traditional resume. It's rare, to be honest, and usually on that page with the music, you would also kind of include like a little short bio of yourself in general, and also past relevant credits and stuff like that. So they would already get kind of an overview over who you are. But yeah, some people specifically, some executives specifically want a resume. So always have that on hand, just in case they ask. And then understand that they will generally not listen to the entire thing. They will skip through the tracks and just kind of skim through it and get an idea of who you are. Because you don't really need to listen to, the full track to understand whether someone's production value is at a level that you want it to be, or whether someone can write in a style that you need them to write in, or anything like that. You don't need hours of music to determine that, so they will generally only skip through, a couple of seconds, couple of bars, and then skip to the next track and just kind of move through your reel fairly quickly. Which isn't to say everybody does that. I have had executives that listen to the whole thing. Also, I've noticed that in video games, very often the audio people do listen to the whole thing, or most of it. Again, it's personal preference. Executives at studios tend to be very busy and they have to get through a ton of reels every day. So, they don't usually take the time. Now, if based on your reel you are selected for the final round, which is usually 3 to 5 people, roughly, what happens is you'll have a meeting with the creatives in charge, and they will kind of talk to you a bit, get to know you a bit, and then they will also brief you on the project itself, but they will brief you specifically on usually 3 scenes. So they will give you 3 scenes from the whatever it is you're pitching for, and brief you on what they want for those scenes, and then expect you to score those scenes, basically. which can add up to a lot of work, actually. Like it can add up to like 10 minutes of music sometimes. Or I've also had pitches where they had like an entire 15-minute animated episode that they wanted scored, or, you know, just sometimes they're asking for a lot. The thing that for me is that it's not a very... I don't love it because you don't really have a chance to write themes or anything, right? Because you're just scoring random scenes. So they're going to give you like a comedy scene from it, and they're going to give you like a sad scene from it or an emotional thing, and then like an action or something with movement in it to see that you have the storytelling abilities. But I feel like that's not really how we usually work. Like you wouldn't just score random scenes. You would write themes first and establish a sound. And, you know, workflow-wise, that's not really how you would work on any project. So to me, this is kind of not necessarily, I think, the best way to test if someone can storytell throughout a whole movie or a whole TV show by just scoring like a little snippet. Because you can't really show skills in like character development or theme development or anything, because there's nothing there. You're just kind of writing random music to a scene of a production you haven't seen. But so you will send those off. Usually they send you an upload link to whatever they're using at their studio, some secure thing that you can upload your 3 scenes to, and then eventually they will watch all of them and take their pick of whoever they want to work with. Sometimes the process is slightly different. I have pitched for 1 or 2 things where they did not give us scenes, but where they wanted us to write a 5-minute theme suite, which personally I think is a better approach because it's much closer to how we would actually get started on a project. Like you would write a theme suite or multiple standalone themes, right? And establish the sound before you start scoring to picture. Other times I've only had to submit a reel and then they've picked me just based on the reel. So there was no scoring any scenes or writing anything original. Other times it can also be a bit more involved where they give you, if you submit early enough, they give you a feedback round. So you're gonna get feedback on the first delivery of those scenes, and then they're gonna test if you can address feedback and how you react to, you know, criticism and having to do revisions. But so here are my thoughts on this whole thing. We need to talk about the money of it all, especially in this economy, because this is all usually multiple days of work for no pay. There's like 2 or 3 studios that I know of that do pay a couple $100 if you do get into the final round and they require you to actually work on the thing. They give you a couple $100, which doesn't necessarily make up for the time, but I personally do appreciate it that, you know, they recognize that they're asking for you to lay down work for several days to do this and, you know, compensate you for it. It's much more common with game studios. I've rarely pitched on a game for free. I've done it like once or twice, but most of the time where I've pitched on games, there was a fee involved. I think it's because they're more like corporate tech structures, and so it's a little more like proper. Hollywood can be a little bit more of a Wild West kind of situation. But yeah, with game studios, so far my experience has been that they usually compensate you at least with a couple $100. Sometimes even more, sometimes 1,000, sometimes 1,500. But so they seem to be a lot more conscious of what they're asking, especially if there's multiple interview rounds, which happens a lot with game companies where you have multiple interviews and then tests and all this kind of stuff. They're a bit more conscious of how much they're asking. I feel like this is also now experienced by other sectors in the job market, because I always thought it was kind of funny when, you know, people were crying about having to find like 2 jobs in their lives. And I'm like, listen, we're constantly in that boat. We're constantly applying. We're constantly pitching. We're constantly auditioning. This is our life. This is how that goes. Because right now you get a lot of people complaining about, you know, the multiple round interview process and that there are 10 test tasks where you have to work on something for multiple hours or even a day. And that has unfortunately been our reality this whole time. And it's the same for actors and a lot of other branches in this industry where, you know, you have to like audition 200 times to get that one thing. And it never stops. It never stops until you reach a point where you're so high up in the food chain that you no longer have to pitch. That goes for A-list composers, that goes for A-list actors. Like, they don't audition anymore. But yeah, the process is very time-consuming and requires a lot of applications, much like how the rest of the job market is right now. I think it's in part also because right now the job market is pretty bad, at least here in the United States, where there's way more applicants than there are jobs available. And that has always been the case for the film industry. There have always been more actors that wanted to act than there have been roles available. And now we have the same thing with composers. There are way more composers that want to compose for film and TV than there are actual jobs available. And so this is just now the reality. But yeah, the time it takes to, you know, read the briefing, make a reel, have a meeting, score those scenes, or write a 5-minute suite, it's crazy if you think about the fact that we obviously have other things to do. So what often has happened to me is that I send off a reel and you don't hear anything from them for like weeks or months. And then they finally get back to you and are like, yeah, you're in the final round. And meanwhile, I'm like a week away from a session. I'm in crunch time on a gig with a returning client who's paying my bills. And they basically want me to just drop everything right now and, you know, do some unpaid labor, which I don't know what they're thinking, that we have nothing else going on, because a lot of us do, especially if there's a lot of time between the actual submission of the reel and them notifying us that we actually made it. For me, this has just too often resulted in all-nighters, because obviously I can't just drop the project I'm on right now and risk, you know, messing up with a returning client that I actually like working with for a hypothetical future gig that I may or may not get. So I'm gonna have to still work the entire day on the gig that I actually have and then spend all night working on the pitch, which inevitably is not going to result in my best work. Like, I understand that for us, the philosophy is usually you have to secure the next job while you're on your current job, but there should be some grace given to composers who actually are busy working. Because trying to do all this pitching while also being on a project is that's just going to result in burnout. That's going to result in some kind of health problems, because you can't constantly do this kind of thing and get away with it. Like, your body is always going to take back what you take from it. And then 90% of the time, the studios do default back to the people they already know, especially during times where there's a downturn in work, because then bigger composers go for smaller gigs that normally they wouldn't have gone for, so they're kind of pushing down everybody else. But even outside of that, studios are very, very risk averse, especially the old studios. They really don't like new stuff. They don't like new IPs, and they don't like working with new people. And as such, most gigs aren't up for grabs anyway. A lot of it, as I said at the beginning, is previous relationships. They already know someone they want, so they're asking that person directly, or the director is bringing someone on with them, so it's not even ever available for anybody else. Top productions, as I said, go to established A-list composers who don't have to pitch anymore, but that's also never opened up to the rest of us. And then you have a lot of other pitches that are about, you know, the story takes place in a specific culture, and so in order to maintain authenticity, they might be like, let's try and get someone from that culture so that we can make this, you know, more authentic than it would be if we just got anybody who's not familiar with that culture. which personally I don't have a problem with. Certain groups are extremely underrepresented already. I just have a problem with it when studios waste my time, because pitching already takes so much time, especially if you get into the final round, and it's already unpaid in most cases, and I'm already struggling to get it done next to my regular gigs, only to then later find out that they were actually going for a very specific person of a very specific background, which is fine by me, but then don't make me believe that I have a shot at the gig. Don't waste my time. Some of their requirements are oddly very specific. That's fine by me, but then don't put me in the pool with these people. You know, don't put me into the pitching pool and make me think that I could have that gig, and I get my hopes up and I put in all this work for no pay, and then I realize later on that it was never up, you know, for grabs for someone like me. That's kind of shitty, you know. That's kind of, if you already know what you want, just go for that. Just make a short list of those people that you think are the right fit for that and just have them pitch, because they actually have a shot. But don't waste other people's time. Like, that's just disrespectful. Sometimes it's also about having the right passport. This has happened to me many times where my EU passport has actually helped, where, you know, they're getting specific funding from specific cities or regions. And so for that, they have to hire someone with EU citizenship. Other times it's been a problem that I'm not a taxpayer in the EU, so they would have to hire a different composer who actually has a residence or their business inside the EU. Sometimes they have to get a composer from a very particular region to, you know, still get their funding. It happens to me mostly with Hallmark, for example, when they call. A lot of the time, their first question is, do you have a Canadian passport? And I don't. So then I can't work on stuff where they got funding from Toronto or Vancouver or whatever region, because then they're going to have to get a composer from that region. So then those gigs are not up for grabs. But if you look at my Hallmark credits, you will see that most of them are the ones that take place in Europe. So they're like American European productions where I did have the right passport, or they're American productions where it doesn't matter so much. So that happens too, having the right nationality or the right residence in a specific tax region so that they can get their deductions. And then other times, which is something that I do a lot, is, especially if it's a multiple part series, to have the first right to, the right of first refusal, I think it's called, or first right to negotiation, which is basically if you're doing the first part of a trilogy, you can put that into your contract that for the next two parts, they also have to approach you first. So then those next two movies are also not up for grabs for anybody else. So that's how these things go. And it is what it is, right? There's nothing we can do other than adjust our own behavior and our own approach. We can't really control how other people play this game or set up this game that we're trying to play. Overall, it's very hard to get hired by people who don't know you. And I can't blame them, because I do the same thing. If I need someone, like for Pro Tools prep, for example, and my usual person isn't available, what I will do is I will reach out to a colleague of mine or a friend who is a colleague and just be like, hey, who do you use for this? My regular isn't available and I need someone reliable who can do this stuff. And then they will just, point me, they will send me contact information and I'll reach out to the person and then they're hired based on the recommendation, based on the trust. Or, hiring people that you already kind of know from, having talked to them a lot, having met them a lot. So I can't blame anybody because we all do this. We're all guilty of wanting to work with people we trust and wanting to work with people that come recommended. So again, it is what it is. That's just how it works. But so at some point I've decided I've had enough of this character building exercise. Like, it's great to develop a thick skin and to learn how to handle rejection with grace and without getting your feelings hurt. But we gotta figure out the ROI of this to see if the emotional damage is even worth it. So I sat down after 2 years, this was a little while ago, where for 2.5 years, I did almost every single pitch that came across my desk. Everything that was forwarded to me, I was like, I'm gonna do it. And I tried to figure out, okay, how much time have I spent on these and how much work have I actually gotten out of it? It was not good. The return on investment, bad. If my self-worth is gonna take a weekly beating, there's gotta be a decent payoff because I'm not a glutton for punishment. And then I compared all this time that I spent pitching for free and, not getting a lot of work out of it with all the other approaches that did get me work, that did get my bills paid, that did result in returning clients, that did result in really nice gigs. And pitching is just the smallest part of how I get gigs. All the other approaches actually had a way higher success rate. I've always heard from a variety of, older industry veterans that it's all a numbers game, but that advice has aged like milk. Maybe that was true 20, 25 years ago when there were way fewer of us, but now there's so many of us going for the same gigs that the payoff is just so much smaller. It's what you see in every other industry right now where, a job that normally had like 10 or 20 applicants now has 200 applicants, which reduces your chances so much that it's almost not worth it. No amount of thick skin and resilience is going to change that. So my solution to this problem was that I just got a lot more selective with what pitches I'm going to do. I'm still pitching. It's just I'm going to go only for the things that I really want, that I really think I'm a very good fit for. And if I have the time to pitch, if I don't have the time, I'm just not going to do it anymore. I intend to be a lot more intentional with my time. And my workload has not suffered even when I got much more selective. I still have as much work as before or even more work than I had before. So clearly reducing the amount of pitching I've done has done nothing for the amount of gigs that I get. And my payment has actually gotten higher over the years, so there has not been a negative effect on reducing the amount of pitching, being more selective, and being more intentional with my time and effort. Like, you don't get a trophy for participating in all of them and burning yourself out. Focus more on methods with a higher success rate. Focus more on building relationships. And focus more on your existing network and try to expand that. I've also noticed that I have a much higher success rate in pitching with video games. So if it's between, I only have time for one thing and there's a pitch for a movie and a pitch for a video game, I will pick the video game just because my success rate there is so much higher than in film and television. And I also don't participate anymore if I feel like the pitch is not a genuine pitch. If I feel like just looking at the subject matter that they're looking for a very specific person and I do not check that box, I'm not going to participate anymore. I've wasted enough of my time doing that. And there are way more useful things I can do with that time building proper relationships than trying to get something that is meant for someone else. So if I get the sense that the pitch is just kind of a farce and they already know what they want, they already know who they want, or there's like a much bigger composer involved, I'm just like, what is even the point? I found that it's much better to network horizontally on your level instead of constantly shooting for the stars. Because the people up there, they have their own network, right? They've been here for 30, 40, 50 years. They have their people, their go-to people. And it's very difficult to get into that group of people. It's not impossible, it's being done, but it's not common. And it's much more common to network with people who are on your own level or just very slightly above your level or very slightly below your level on the career ladder, and to rise with them together to the top. to have them bring you with them. Because it's much less likely that you get to skip 30 steps and you get to like participate for much further at the top. Which isn't to say don't shoot for the stars. Sometimes I will shoot for something that I kind of know I don't have a shot at, but every now and then you should shoot for the stars, right? Every now and then you can just get a bit delusional and just be like, whatever, I have the time, so let's try it. It's unlikely, I'm not gonna get my hopes up, but let's just do it. Who knows what's gonna happen? And I'm sure that has worked out for someone somewhere. So I'm not saying don't ever do that. I'm just saying be intentional with your time. Don't just do that, because then you're just going to be constantly rejected and constantly disappointed. And so my final words here would be, things have changed quite a bit. So when listening to older people that have been here since before the digital age, if they give advice, take it with a grain of salt, because the rules that they know from back in the day may not apply anymore. It doesn't work like that anymore. The landscape has dramatically changed with how we get gigs, but also general career trajectories. Because I remember when I started out, or when I was studying, we looked at successful composers and when they got their big break, how many credits they had, right, all this stuff, and it used to be much faster. Again, from the old guard, there's always the you gotta pay your dues, but the reality is that a lot of us have started much sooner than the current A-listers, have started much earlier getting into this, and so a lot of composers that are now my age have more credits and more experience in years than a lot of the current A-listers had when they got their big break. Advice will always be based on personal experiences, right? So if you ask them, they will give you the advice that applied 30 years ago, which, you can't fault them for, because that was their experience. But I feel like they often forget that there's way more of us now getting into this. 30, 40 years ago, this was not a desirable profession, so it was much easier to rise in the ranks than it is now. Then again, it was less accessible, obviously, because technology and, that was much harder. So in terms of accessibility, it's much more accessible to a wider variety of people. But that has also, of course, caused the issue that now you have a lot of applications for one gig. Like kind of an oversaturation that the current A-listers didn't really have to deal with back in the day. And when the industry in general was just very different, right? Streaming didn't exist, digital, anything didn't exist. So the world was entirely different in like the 90s and 80s, or even early 2000s. So take everything with a grain of salt. Take stock of your time and energy, take stock of your resources, focus on relationships, and then find your own way into this. Direct your energy towards the successful ways for you to get gigs, instead of trying to follow someone else's path, because that's their path. That's what worked for them. That's their life. That's not your life. If you're at the very beginning, there's just going to have to be a lot of trial and error, and see what works, and then focus your energy on what works instead of trying to emulate someone else's way. I hope this was helpful. I'm going to try to be more consistent with my videos, but I keep saying that and then not doing it. So I'm not going to promise anything, but I will hopefully see you soon. Go practice.